He signed his first lease before he was old enough to vote. Not as a favor from his family, not under a grandfather's name. His own deal, his own ground, his own risk. At 17 years old, in the flatlands of west central Minnesota, where the wind comes off the prairie in October like something personal. That kid is Chet Larson, fifth-generation farmer, YouTube creator, and the man at the center of a slow-burning tension in his corner of rural Minnesota that never quite went away, even after 440,000 people started watching everything he does. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how a fifth-generation farm boy built one of the most recognized names in agricultural media, what he lost along the way that nobody outside his community fully understood, and why the people closest to what he built still can't agree on whether he's a success story or a warning sign. There is a version of this story that starts with a viral video. That is not the real version. The real version starts in 1918, when the Larson family first worked the land near Correll, Minnesota. Over the next 100 years, that original homestead grew, slowly, generation by generation, into a multi-family grain operation. By the time Chet came along, Larson Farms was already a serious business. His grandfather Merlin, his father Doug, and his uncle Randy ran the partnership. 3 generations on the same ground, growing corn and soybeans in the same soil their great-grandparents broke open. Chet was on a tractor at 10 years old. Not as a novelty, not as a photo opportunity for the family Christmas card. He was working, running equipment alongside men who had been doing it for decades, absorbing the rhythms of the operation before he could articulate what any of it meant. In a region where most kids his age were figuring out high school sports schedules, Chet was already learning what it felt like to be responsible for something that could go wrong in 1,000 different ways: weather, equipment failure, commodity prices that moved while you slept. At 17, he took his first lease, his own parcel, his own rent obligation, his own decision about what to plant and when to plant it. The farm family supported it, but the ground was his. That kind of early commitment either shapes a person or breaks them. In Chet's case, it embedded something that would define everything that came after. A belief that if you were going to do something, you did it at full commitment, not at half measure. He farmed through his teenage years and into his early 20s with no thought of a camera, no social media strategy, no monetization plan, just the work, the land, and a family operation that had survived a century of hard seasons. West Central Minnesota doesn't reward people who treat farming as a lifestyle choice. The soil doesn't care about your intentions, only your execution. And here is what most coverage of Larson Farms never addresses. Chet spent more than a decade farming before a single person outside his county knew his name. The YouTube channel didn't create the farmer. The farmer existed long before the channel. That distinction matters because it's the reason the channel works. But here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. In 2019, a friend suggested Chet start posting on Instagram. His response, by his own account, "Instagram is for girls. Why would I want to do that?" He started anyway. Within 12 months, he had 25,000 followers. People were not just looking at grain bins and tractor shots. They were watching. They were reading his captions. They were asking questions about planting decisions and equipment choices and what a real harvest day actually looked like from the inside. There is a large audience, it turns out, for the unfiltered version of agricultural life. Not the sanitized marketing version that farm bureaus produce, but the actual version, where things break and the weather turns and you still have to get the crop in. Then Cole the corn star reached out. Cole Johnson, the millennial farmer's neighbor and one of the more established names in ag media at the time, told Chet that Instagram had a ceiling. YouTube was the platform where farming content actually built an audience. It was harder. A 10-second clip became a 20-minute video. You had to learn to edit, to script, to hold attention across the length of a full production. Chet had no background in any of that, but he started. What happened next was not gradual. The channel hit 100,000 subscribers within a few months of launch. Viewers from the Instagram audience migrated over immediately, and the YouTube algorithm began distributing the content beyond that initial base. For an audience starved of authentic agricultural content, real mud, real breakdowns, real arguments about equipment decisions, Larson Farms was something different. The channel didn't pretend the hard parts weren't hard. The viewer breakdown was striking. Approximately 93% male, 7% female. The audience wasn't watching for entertainment in the traditional sense. They were watching because Chet was showing them something true. A farming operation that looked like something from their own childhoods, or their father's childhoods, or the version of American rural life they felt was disappearing. By the time the channel crossed 200,000 subscribers, it had become something more than a farm diary. It had become a document. But Chet wasn't doing this alone, and the person who made the whole thing actually work, behind the camera, in the editing suite, in the hours after the fieldwork was done, is the part of the Larson farm story that most people who followed from the beginning still feel deeply. And that's when the decision was made, the one nobody around her saw coming. Chet married Nicole on January 24, 2015. They were young. She was fully embedded in farm life, not as a reluctant spouse, but as someone who understood it and chose it and built something inside it. Nicole ran her own channel. It was called Nicole's Untold Gold, and it was her own creative project, separate from the farm content, built around her personality and perspective. She starred in Larson Farms videos too. She was the person in the background of many of those early videos who you noticed even when you weren't supposed to be paying attention to her, because she had a presence on camera that is genuinely rare. She was funny, she was warm, she handled the editing. That last part is the detail that most people outside the farming YouTube community don't fully appreciate. Nicole personally edited the Larson Farms videos, hours of raw footage from a working farm, cut down to coherent 20-minute productions, with the right moments kept and the dead time removed. She built the post-production workflow that made the channel look professional, when most ag content still looked like it was filmed on a flip phone in 2008. The channel's early rise wasn't just Chet's farming knowledge and authentic delivery, it was Nicole's craftsmanship behind the scenes. In 2020, the family traveled to California. Viewers noticed the trip. Some sensed something was wrong from the tone of the videos. Nicole had been fighting myeloid sarcoma, a rare and aggressive form of cancer that develops in soft tissue rather than the bone marrow, where most myeloid cancers originate. The treatments took them away from the farm. The content became quieter. On May 27, 2021, Nicole passed away. She was 25 years old. The Larson Farms channel went silent for nearly a week. When it returned without the person who had quietly made it what it was. The grief was real, and it was public, whether Chet wanted it to be or not. Hundreds of thousands of people who had watched Nicole on screen for 2 years were processing loss right alongside a man who was also trying to figure out how to keep a farm running. The channel also needed a new post-production operation from scratch. Larson Farms now contracts an external editing company. That transition didn't happen overnight. Most people who know this story stop here. But the real story starts right now. While the channel was growing, the farm itself was growing faster. Larson Farms today spans 6,500 acres in west central Minnesota. That's not a hobby farm. That's not a small family plot. 6,500 acres of crop ground, producing approximately 875,000 bushels of corn and 150,000 bushels of soybeans in an average year. Alongside the row crops, the operation runs a custom feedlot with capacity for 3,400 head of cattle at any given time, turning out roughly 7,000 finished cattle per year. They run a DeKalb seed dealership on top of that. The ownership structure is still technically anchored in the older generation. Merlin, Doug, and Randy hold the partnership. Chet, the face of the channel, the name most people associate with the operation, is described on the farm's own website as working his way into ownership. That is not a small thing. It means the man who signed his first farm lease at 17, who has been the public voice of this operation for half a decade, still does not own the majority of what he has helped build and brand into a nationally recognized name. To understand how the farm got to 6,500 acres, you have to understand how land expansion actually works in this part of Minnesota. You don't buy 6,000 acres in a single transaction. You accumulate it, acre by acre, parcel by parcel. Retired neighbors, retiring landlords, family members who decide the next generation isn't going to farm. Every time another small operation wound down, Larson Farms was often in a position to absorb that ground. Chet has described the process plainly. The farm started with smaller bins acquired from those same retired neighbors and landlords. The infrastructure grew because the acreage grew. The acreage grew because the Larsons kept farming when others stopped. That process is not malicious. It is also not painless for the communities it moves through. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. In March 2026, a farming podcast ran an episode titled, Directly, This Farmer Has 500K Subscribers and His Neighbors Still Hate Him. The subject was Chet Larson. That title was not invented by outside commentators looking for conflict. It reflected a real dynamic that people who know the area and people who have followed the channel for years already understood. The tension between large-scale farming operations and the communities around them is not unique to Larson Farms. It is one of the defining tensions of rural American agriculture right now. Here is the reality of how farming works at scale in west central Minnesota. When an operation gets large enough to compete for available ground, it starts winning rental agreements that smaller operations lose. A family that ran 400 acres and wanted to expand to 800 might find themselves bidding against an operation that already farms 6,000. The math is different, the leverage is different. The large operation can afford to pay more per acre because it has more efficiency, more equipment, more storage, and, in the case of Larson Farms specifically, a media operation that generates secondary income and sponsorship deals that smaller farms do not have. None of that is illegal. None of it violates the norms of how farmland rental works in the Midwest. But legal and comfortable are not the same thing. In small rural communities where the same last names have been on the same land for 4 or 5 generations, watching a single operation absorb the ground that used to support 3 or 4 independent families creates a specific kind of frustration. It doesn't require a single bad actor. The resentment accumulates in the aggregate. The camera adds another layer. When your neighbor is farming 6,000 acres and posting videos of it to 500,000 subscribers, the asymmetry becomes impossible to ignore. There's a version of farm life online that looks thriving and well-lit and narrated by someone who knows how to hold an audience. And there's the version lived off camera by the people farming 200 acres and not getting the land deal and not having a sponsored segment with a seed company. Both are real, but only one is what most people see. What happened next is the reason this story spread across the internet. After Nicole's death, the channel needed a new center of gravity. Erik Larson, nicknamed the Big Swede, a nickname that came entirely from YouTube comment sections and stuck so completely it became his actual public identity, stepped into a larger role. He is Randy's son, which makes him Chet's cousin, though many viewers assumed for a long time that the Swede moniker meant he was unrelated to the family entirely. He is a full-time farmhand. He was Chet's close friend before he was a channel personality. In the grief period after Nicole passed, the Big Swede's presence on screen became less of a guest appearance and more of a structural element. He is funny in a way that doesn't feel performed. The comment section started generating material for his character. The name, running jokes, expectations. Chet described it this way: the more the camera was on him, the more his personality came out, and the more viewers wanted to see it. The Big Swede didn't become a personality because someone planned it. He became one because the channel needed something to hold it together, and he happened to be there and happened to be genuinely watchable. That is how a lot of the real infrastructure at Larson Farms got built. Not according to a plan, but in response to necessity. The grain bins expanded because the acres expanded. The social media operation started because a friend suggested it. The channel became a family production because Nicole built it that way. The Big Swede became a central figure because Nicole was no longer there to be one. Chet himself is described as naturally shy, not the conventional personality type you'd expect to attract 300 million views. He did not walk into this as a media person. He walked into it as a farmer who got talked into filming himself, discovered people watched, and kept going. The authenticity that drives the channel's retention numbers isn't a content strategy, it's just who he is. He never talked about this publicly. Until now. Wait, let me rephrase that. The specific details of how the post-production operation collapsed after Nicole's death, how the Big Swede transition was improvised rather than designed, and how the farm's expansion was never separate from the channel's economics. Those details exist scattered across interviews, but they have never been assembled into a single coherent picture, until this video. By mid-2026, Larson Farms sits at approximately 440,000 YouTube subscribers and has crossed 300 million lifetime views. Those numbers generate real income. Estimates from channel analytics platforms, which rely on public AdSense data and view velocity, put monthly YouTube revenue somewhere in the range of 5 figures. On top of that, sponsored content integrations with companies that sell equipment, seed, grain handling systems, and agricultural supplies. Chet has done branded content for grain bin manufacturers, farm boot companies, and seed dealers. The DeKalb dealership the farm operates is both a legitimate agricultural business and a natural extension of the channel's brand footprint. The audience trusts product recommendations from someone they've watched farm in real time for 5 years. That revenue stream matters for a specific reason that most coverage of farming YouTube channels ignores. It changes the economics of land rental. When a farming operation has a secondary income source that its neighbors do not have, when it can afford to pay slightly more per acre because the margin pressure is partially offset by media revenue, it creates a competitive imbalance that is invisible in the rental market but very real in its effects. This is not an accusation. Chet Larson has not done anything that isn't standard practice in modern agricultural business development. But it is the mechanism behind the neighbor tension that outsiders often miss. They look at the tension and assume it's jealousy over YouTube fame. It is not that simple. The channel and the farm are economically interconnected in ways that directly affect the land market around Corral, Minnesota. Meanwhile, the personal chapter keeps moving. Chet introduced John Marie Golden, a licensed nursing home administrator from Appleton, Minnesota, as his partner in March 2023. In April 2025, he announced their engagement. The channel, which documented so much of his life including the hardest part of it, documented this too. He is still officially working his way into farm ownership, still posting, still farming, still one of the most watched agricultural creators in the country. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got, until now. The question people keep circling around when they talk about Larson Farms is, what is this thing exactly? Is it a farm that happens to have a YouTube channel? Or is it a media operation that happens to involve a farm? The answer is both, and the fact that it has become both is exactly what makes it complicated. Chet Larson started farming before social media existed in the form it takes today. The farm's 100-year history is real. The fifth-generation identity is real. The hard physical labor that goes into every single video, the breakdowns, the weather calls, the 3 a.m. starts during planting season, none of that is staged. He is genuinely farming 6,500 acres while filming it. But the farm he is farming is larger than it would be without the channel's income. The equipment is newer, the storage infrastructure is more advanced, the ability to compete for land rental in a tight market is stronger. The YouTube operation didn't build the farm from nothing. The farm was already there, already large, already multi-generational. What the channel did was accelerate the trajectory. And in rural communities where land is finite and the families farming it remember who used to be on every parcel, acceleration has consequences. The neighbors who reportedly resent what Chet built are not wrong that something changed. They are also not wrong that it changed because he worked harder, filmed more honestly, and built an audience that most of them never considered possible. Both things are true at the same time. That is the specific tension that doesn't resolve cleanly, no matter how many podcast episodes are made about it. West Central Minnesota has been losing rural population for decades. The farms that remain are getting larger. That trend was happening before Larson Farms had a YouTube channel, and it will keep happening after. Chet Larson didn't create the structural forces that are reshaping agriculture in that part of the country. He just built something visible inside them, and the visibility is permanent now. 300 million views is not a number that unhappens. The story of Chet Larson is not really about YouTube. It's about what happens when someone who was shaped entirely by a place decides to show that place to the world, and in doing so, changes the place itself. He started farming at 17 because that's what his family did, and he was built for it. He started posting because someone suggested it, and he decided to try. He kept going after the hardest year of his life because the farm doesn't stop moving, and neither did he. And somewhere in the process of documenting all of it, he turned a fifth-generation family operation in West Central Minnesota into something that 500,000 people watch every week. Right now, Chet is farming, still working toward full ownership of the ground his family has held for over a century, and building a new chapter alongside Jean Marie. The channel is still posting. The big suite is still in the videos. The grain bins are still filling. The question is not whether Chet Larson worked for what he built. He clearly did. The question is harder than that, and it's the one worth leaving in the comments. Do you think a farming operation that benefits financially from a YouTube channel has an unfair advantage over neighbors who don't? Or is that just what modern business looks like in 2026?